Myself, I want to start with a quote of Zayami. Zayami, the No writer and performer. He said that one's whole professional life is a tension between one's own aesthetic, what you want to do artistically, and the taste of the public, what the public like, the public taste. So the implication is the public taste is not as sophisticated, you know, and they need quick entertainment, and they may be a little lazy to think. And you have to do how much that you can do your vision and how much you really owe to the audience. And I think it's the question I want everybody to think about, is how much we consider the audience when we're creating art. Okay? I think it's got to be really extremely large part of our discussion is what sort of audience are we talking to? You know, where will we be doing it? What sort of audience come to that thing? Who's paying this sort of money for it? Who the audience is almost neglected. There's almost no books about it. No one has written about the role of the audience and really looking at what goes on out there while we act here. What happens out there, you know, in their hearts and minds. And so that's the interesting one. So this Zayami statement presupposes that the audience is crucial to the viability of the theatre company. That satisfy the audience and your theatre company is viable. And what's exciting here is to see the popular theatre. It lives on the box office. What's happened in Australia is there's a handout mentality. They want funding. I'm an artist, I need funding. And they start to ignore the audience. So I was born into variety. That's a form of entertainment, a series of variety acts, light entertainment. My father was a magician and a ventriloquist. My mother was the musician playing the music for the show, and my sister and I performed from the age of 4. My father used snakes and animals in his performance, so my early memory was holding a bag of snakes in a box, waiting to come out of the box. And that from the age of 4, I was on stage. My aunt was a contortionist working in the circus, and sometimes we would be left with the circus for a while. And believe me, there's nothing glamorous about a circus. It's poignant. And in those days, they had animals, so it was quite traumatic, you know, what happened with the animals and the death of the animals and all of that. And what happens to the animals when they close them down, because they suddenly were banned, and then all these animals had nowhere to go, and so they would be put in zoos, and at certain ages, at time of the day, they'd start to perform in the zoo. It's so beautiful, really. There's a lot written about circus, we know about that. But 2 aspects ingrained themselves for me in young. One was that if there wasn't a big audience and our box office was small, then we didn't eat very well that week. You know, we couldn't get new shoes. So the audience was really important. Full house, wow, good, everybody was happy, you know. A small house, a real worry. My mother used to get really tense, you know, small houses, and she said, can't we have to change the act, or let's try to change their job, you know. There was always a worry when the audience was small. So for me, the audience is very important, so you can see where I'm coming from. The other aspect was that I noticed that the audience was very willing to play the game. So willing. And I think that willingness needs respect. You know how difficult it is. They have to organize the, babysitter, they've got to organize the transport, they've got to eat early, they've got to travel, they've got to get the car parking, and then they come to the theatre for us. And they're willing to imagine and play the game. I think this is remarkable. It's a miracle that they still do it, you know, when there's so many other things they could spend their time, and they come still. I love saying, where are you from? Why are you here? It is wonderful. And they come from far and wide, and they all have different stories as to why they want to be there that night. It's quite miraculous. So they're very willing to play the game, but also they don't quite know what the game is. So I think part of it we have to tell them. They're willing to be manipulated, and they're willing to be gulled and cheated, particularly with magic. They love cheat. We cheat them all the time. And I would be there, my father would be doing this trick, and I'd know what's going on. And they're all like that. And I'm thinking, gee, we're just cheating you. So my aesthetic changed when I started to do work. I started to do no cheating. I started to say, no, we won't have anything up the sleeves. We won't have mirrors, no smoke, no red lights. So I'm a bit anti-theatrical with my plays, more Brechtian. I like the concept of more light. Let's see what's really happening here. So my concept of my aesthetic developed from an unwillingness to cheat them too much. I want them to know, because it's more fun knowing how it works. It's actually more fun knowing what's happening here. But they love that, and they love the narrative, and they love certain things. And I think we've got to supply certain things. Okay, so I sort of got out of that. I started to direct my father, and he didn't like that. So he said, if you want to start directing a show, go somewhere else. So I went somewhere else. And I went... During this period, we used to make films because we had a lot of animals. So my father built a zoo, and then we had to use the zoo to film it. So we started making nature films and sent them to Europe. And I started to direct films, and I was very interested in films. I got very interested in this concept of zooming in on here. I love this close-up thing. Much better than the big picture. So I'd grown up with the big picture. That didn't interest me, but suddenly being able to zoom in. So I got very interested in what goes on here. So it took me towards naturalism, far too much, obviously. I don't necessarily love naturalism, but that's where I ended up. And then when I got exposed to Asian theatre quite early. So when I graduated, I was at Churchill Fellowship. I went to Japan, I went to China, and I came to India. And I came to the National School here, and Dr. Al-Kazi wanted to go to Udupi to see Yakshagana, so he took me, and I just sat there for a week watching Yakshagana. And it changed my life. It changed my life. So you never know what experience will do anything for you. So I'm a great believer, give yourself over to the experience, because you don't know whether that's going to be wonderful or terrible. But either way, you will learn a lot from it, even the terrible experiences. And India in 1973 was not easy at all in the provinces. Okay, from the Japanese theatre, I got very interested in the principle of doing less, of the principle of distillation, that the weight and the energy is empowered in this thing. I got interested in the kabuki and the theatricality of that, but I started to develop a principle of that's the extreme, that's theatricality, this is distillation, less potent, distilled, and life's in the middle. And acting needs to move to distilled moments and exaggerated moments. So exaggeration and distillation are two polars of our lives, and we need to use all of those on stage. I began to develop my own acting theories on all of this. And later I played with laboratory work, trying to look at the power of the mind and the power of the spiritual side of theatre. You know about shamanism and things, of course, and you know about the rituals that came from religious rituals, and you know about religious rituals. But faith and the belief in something else and willing things to happen, I did laboratory stuff on that, and honestly, we scared ourselves. We all got frightened. We did things that were so freaky, with concentration, group concentration. and it would happen. We go, oh my God. So we stopped playing with it because we didn't know what we were doing. But there was a whole area where the power of the minds, because my father used to do mind reading acts also. Some of it has tricks to it, but others were to do with concentration exercises. So very, very interested in concentration exercises. Anyway, I left this thing of the other, but I do think no one's explored it. Some of Grotowski did a little bit of it. You know, when there's slow motion, they've got candles, they're singing a Polish folk song, and you just feel the centuries come through. Thousands of years come through, and you know you're part of evolution. It's very sort of strange things happen. I think theatre magic is also can embrace those things. So I got interested in the idea of when you are being, when I am, and when I am presenting, okay? Which is slightly more surfacey. I'm more conscious of communicating, is the presenting, but I'm less conscious of communicating, I'm being. I always tell the students about 1888 and the preface to Miss Julie, when Strindberg said, the actor may even turn her back on the audience. Wow. For thousands of years we've been playing the audience, and suddenly he says, ignore the audience. You know? And now for 100 years we've all been doing that. 100 years we've had fourth wall. How stupid of us, you know? How really stupid. And for thousands of years we've tried to reflect life, you know. Hamlet says the purpose of the actor is to hold up a mirror to nature. And we've been trying to do that for thousands of years, get it more like life. And the moment we achieved it, when we could conquer naturalism, around the turn of the end of the 19th century, along came the movies. And that media belongs there. Went straight into the movies and is there now. That naturalism belongs there. So when we do naturalism in the theatre now, we have to do it in a small space. This is okay, here you can all see my eyes. If you can't see your eyes, you can't do naturalism. And that's an interesting one, because this small theatre mentality, which happened after the war, after World War II, many, many small theatres built, and we all went into small venues. And now there are some events in this festival where it's just one-on-one. It's just one actor, one audience. And that's happening in the world. And festivals are losing money on it because you can't have a big theatre with a lot of audience to pay a lot of money for the ones. These small things get quite expensive. But they're very special because the audience feels special, which is part of what I want to talk a little bit further about. Okay. Yes, this concept of being and presenting, yes. I'll leave that one. Now, I went into being a director, have to been acting, but I like playing character parts, you see. I liked hiding. I liked doing the makeup and doing the funny walk and being a character, and which is another way of wearing a mask. I realized that standing there and bearing my soul naked was a very particular thing. Doesn't turn me on. But for actors, that's the turn on. And I admire it. I can't tell you how much I admire it. It is enormously, for me, difficult to be honest out there. But I do love that. But I did go into directing because I wanted to design and I liked composing music and I did everything. So I went into directing. And I still got a record. In Australia, I've run 4 different theatre companies. Most directors only go 1 or 2. I've run, as artistic, 4 different ones. The first one was dealing with the classics, modern versions of the classics, making the classics accessible. Okay, the definition of a classic, it can be reinterpreted to a new generation. That's what a classic is. So when you reinterpret it, of course you've got to make it. How much do you make Shakespeare Australian, for example, or Indian? And how much do you want to be like Shakespeare? Probably not at all. Only once in my life have I seen a Shakespeare production in full Elizabethan gear. I didn't much like it, actually. funny clothes, They look like Martians, They're so foreign, So, when they're foreign, it's not me. So I always want the audience to think that could be me up there. Okay, that was my first theatre company, Jane Street. And then I went to an alternative theatre company, Nimrod. And then we did European theatre. We were quite rebellious, because all of Australian theatre and Singapore theatre was all British. So we said, no, let's do some German plays, let's do some French plays, let's do some Belgian plays, let's do the Russian plays. So we were quite rebellious in that way, consciously going to Europe. And of course, Europe is really exciting. You don't find just talking heads, like in British theatre. But you understand why the English-speaking world tends to stay only with British theatre. But there is so much more to European theatre. So that was good. We did some Asian plays. We also discovered that we wouldn't do any more the American or British translations. So if we did a Chekhov, for example, we did our own translations. So the first time we had Australian translations. This seemed really important. Even though it was still in English, we used to act them in a British translation. And there's subtle differences all the way through. And the audience can tell. It's from somewhere else. So you're watching a Russian play via the drawing rooms of Britain, So that's too obvious. You want to go directly. So we had to do our own new translations, which was exciting. Then I ran a state theatre company, the Royal Queensland Theatre Company it was then. I de-royaled it. We didn't tell the Queen. We just cut the royal off. We didn't tell her, because no one knew how to tell the Queen, and we didn't want her name on the thing. But theatre's elitist anyway. With a royal theatre, can you imagine how frightening that is for general public? Who wants to go to a royal theatre? But there I did what we call a state repertoire. So you do a classic that hasn't been seen for a while, put a star in it. You've got a smash hit. You do best play from America, Pulitzer Prize. You bring the best play from the West End. You do a European play that hasn't been seen for a while. And it's very easy. That repertoire is very easy. I found I could very easily cover the more popular and the more challenging, very easy. In fact, after 5 years, I got bored. It was too easy. And that's why I get a bit impatient when these directors of state theatre companies run into debt and get it all wrong. I think, but it's so easy. You just get the best from here, the best from there, the best from there, the best from there. But there are two things that they neglect. I'm going to go on to those. So, and then I went to the Malt House, Playbox Malt House in Melbourne, and I worked with living writers. It was a new work company, and we commissioned playwrights. We had living playwrights all the time coming in. I had to make them feel at home, because one of the problems in Britain and in Australia, that the playwrights write at home, and they come in with their script and say, would you read my script? And the directors will, well, give it here, and 3 months later they write a letter. It's terrible. The disrespect for playwrights is shocking. So I had to change all that. I actually got them in and say, come in, this is your home. I made a meeting room where playwrights could come. I got a photocopier with paper. I said, come in, photocopy your plays here. Bring your new scene in. Let's talk about your new scene. So we had to change the status. Because I remember distinctly that Shakespeare was part of a theatre company. Okay? Chekhov was always backstage. He was more interested in the actresses, but he would often be in the dressing rooms all the time. He really loved the theatre. Okay? Those writers knew the theatre, and they write better when they know the theatre. There are others that are writing somewhere else. And there's a big thing that's happening in the world that now playwriting is in crisis, and it's because they've gone back to academic departments and universities, and they're no longer part of theatre companies. They're not loved in the same way and cherished in the same way. And they write away from us. I say, come and join us and write with us. Anyway, that was the best time. But my grounding in the classics was very important. My introduction to different traditions was also very important to me for making new work. So now I arrived at new work with something to bring to it, which seemed to be quite logical. But I loved it. We would commission, I would pay them money. Once we had a big commission, you pay $9,000, $10,000 for the play. And I remember the playwright bringing it, this is the first time I did it, he brought it in and said, here it is. And I read it and I said, okay, well, it needs this, 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 this. And he said, no, that's it. I said, but it's not quite what we talked about. He said, well, but I've changed my mind, you know. I said, well, I don't want to do it anymore. But I tell you what, if you do a new draft, I'll pay you another so much. So I started a different system because the play is never really finished. So instead of paying $10,000 for the play, I say, I'll pay you $2,000 the first draft. If I like it, okay, I'll pay another $2,000 for another draft. But meanwhile, do this, 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 and this. And then another $2,000, another draft. So they would then start to do drafts. One of the problems now in Australia and in Singapore is we often see the first draft or the second draft on stage performed too early. I began to perform things on a ninth draft. That's about where we would be taking to the audience, about a ninth draft. That's a lot of work, but it has organic, has workshops in it, bring the actors in, develop it, make the notes, then he goes away and writes, comes back, etc. Also develop a lot of women writers through that as well, because women won't be selfish. Men will be selfish. You know, they'll find the time. You know, the rest of the family has to stop while they write their play. But women won't naturally do that. So you constantly really have to buy time for women to write. Very important. Okay, so the New Work Company, that's my fourth company I ran, which I love, before going back into teaching. So though my early career was devoted to the classics, to translating and interpreting, the second half of my career was devoted to new work, creating it, the act of creation, okay? And we were building a national repertoire. What plays, what are the concerns that we were on about? What issues, what are our Australian characters, what are our... So that was very interesting. I commissioned it, we produced it, workshop and produced it, and then I had to tour it. And then I got them published. So we began to work with a publishing company, and the program would be the script with the cast list in it. The script became the program, and then I sent them to sister companies, would swap with sister companies, the scripts, and then put them in the libraries around the world. Now from this, the Australian play started to be performed in America, in Canada, and in Britain, and interestingly in Japan, where they performed a lot. We found a very good relationship with some companies in Japan, and developed a model. For 15 years I was taking one event every year to an annual international festival, which is a very particular sort of circuit. And I think if you're creating new work, you create work for the festival circuit, or you create work usually either to stay at home. Usually they're not quite the same thing. Okay, and yes, I won't talk about the state of playwriting anymore. The interesting aspect of all this is I continue to remind people doing new work, because nobody wanted new work. They want the famous work. They want a title, Hedda Gabler. Ooh, we know those plays. But if you go, Falling from Grace, what's that? So it's very difficult to then sell these plays. So you had to find ways to sell a new work. I had to keep telling people that Shakespeare's company was a new work company. Shakespeare was doing new work. The actors wore contemporary clothes. They were writing about metaphors or things about their own society. So it's not that different. They didn't have handed-on classics. I mean, Shakespeare didn't do the Greeks, and Shakespeare didn't do any medieval plays, and Shakespeare didn't do any Roman plays, for example. They just did contemporary plays, time after time after time. It's a good thing to keep in mind, proportionally. Jan Kot, you know the Polish academic called Jan Kot?
Shakespeare Our Contemporary.
He wrote a book called Shakespeare Our Contemporary. I personally hold him the only academic who's really contributed to the practical world of the theatre. Because I held him responsible for the Shakespeare revival. Because suddenly, instead of doing these old British things, doublet and hose and farthingales, and all this wholly classic, suddenly he's saying, let's do it in a contemporary way. And Peter Brook did his famous Midsummer Night's Dream. Okay? Then he did his King Lear, all from the essays of Jan Kott. And everybody said, wow, isn't this Shakespeare fantastic? And ever since, I now learn, of course, that you didn't need a Jan Kott. You'd already found your way into Shakespeare in India long before in the West. But it did revitalise him. And now Shakespeare is become a huge international icon. Every country wants to claim him. But it's a rare academic, and I love the fact that there are academics can change our industry. But I don't know any. If you know of any others, please let me know. Who can really help our box office. He helped our box office. Okay, I'll leave him. Shakespeare, etc. in India. Wow. I'm going to buy that book before I leave. It's a wonderful book, Shakespeare, the Indian Icon. It looks fantastic. But as we know, the familiarity, as we say, breeds contempt. In Australia and in Singapore, if it's local, it can't be very good. If it's from overseas, must be good. And we're actually quite blind to our best qualities. And we need somebody to tell us that those qualities, really, you like that? We go, wow. And we do need to be told this, because we don't automatically think it. We don't have the arrogance of, the British think, we've got the best theatre in the world. And you say, have you seen what Mnuchin's doing over there in Paris lately? They won't acknowledge that French theatre is of any value at all, because the French don't really like Shakespeare. They're the only nation who doesn't get excited about Shakespeare. And I love that fact, but I do think that French theatre is unexplored. And French theatre generally had so many exciting movements coming out of it. Getting that into repertoire is important. So at the Playbox, when I was at the Playbox Malthouse, I developed a touring circuit for the new work. We used to take it around nationally. I had to, because you can't make the money back from one city. We had to play several cities to get the money. Somebody would work for 2 years on a play, and there's only one performance. It's not enough box office. So I was interested in developing a professional playwright that actually can make a living, not by being paid in a drama department and writing the odd play, but actually full-time writing, rewriting, redrafting, doing what Shakespeare did. I was interested in that. So we found that in Manila, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, we could do a week in each city still speaking English. They didn't need subtitles in those days. So we developed this touring circuit to move them around. And then I got interested in what the Asian plays that were happening in Southeast Asia. And we developed another system which I recommend to artistic directors. We call this telling each other's stories. So instead of me in Playbox, instead of me just doing a Japanese play, that is possible. We don't have a good reason for it. In fact, that's one of the problems in Australia. There's not enough Asian theatre there. But we've developed a wonderful idea where if I do your play from your company, you do my play. So we would do this reciprocal thing. So instead of trying to tour a very expensive production with a full, Australian cast to Japan, and the Japanese go, what is this, The Japanese do their own production of the Australian play, and the audience understand it better. And similarly, we do this. Sometimes we bring the playwright, sometimes we bring the director, but in actual fact, an Australian director doing it knows the audience. So part of my thesis here is that knowing your audience is terribly important. Because, for example, we did a Filipino play at one point and brought a Filipino director out, and he directed it as if it were right in Philippines. It was very good. It would work wonderful in the Philippines, but the Australians went, what's this, Whereas if an Australian director had, then it easily spoke to us, but we just needed to change it and assimilate it more into our society. So the very interesting question is, how much should it be? It's a Filipino play. Should we do it exactly Philippines, or should we make it more Australian? That's the challenge. We want the audience to imagine they're still in the Philippines, but we want them to understand. It's the understanding of it. My worry is with traditional theatre, it often makes something, it exoticizes it. So, for example, if Yakshagana were to go to Australia, they would say, wow, aren't those Indians weird? You know? But if you brought a modern Indian play, we go, oh, they're just like us. They're just like us. And that's the interesting thing. The contemporary plays are much more transferable, universally, and comforting. You go, wow, they're just like us. It's very we're not the only weird people who do that. They do that too. It's comforting. The great comforter. Theatre is the great comforter. To know that you're not the only person who thinks like that. There are other people out there who feel those things. It does comfort us. It does make us feel less lonely. So this touring circuit was quite wonderful. And it became a way to save a lot of money and yet still do plays from other countries. It was quite an exciting thing to do. And one of the problems that's happening now is nobody's really playing with that idea. They've sort of dropped it. Australia has, under changes of government, has really gone looking to Britain again. Many of our festival directors are now British people to direct the Australian festival. I go, why? What's that? What is that? What is that mentality? You know? Why have they got to be better from overseas? Why can't we do it? And even if we can't do it, let's learn. And we only really learn by doing it, making our own mistakes. Okay, that said, I've got a lot to tell you, really. So of this, of course, some plays, we assimilate them and they speak directly to the new audiences. Some plays remain foreign. As I say, the traditional works is foreign. I mean, kabuki is really weird, isn't it? Chinese opera is really weird. But new contemporary Chinese play, interesting. Contemporary Japanese play. Contemporary Japanese plays are, I think, still amongst... They've dropped away in the last 8 years, but I would say 8 years ago, the Japanese plays were the most exciting plays being written in the world. I love them. Anyway, that is a model that we should be exploring. I'm going to skip all that. If one works with living writers, especially those who are trying to be professional and write full-time for a living, and if one if one works with them, one understands the bewilderment when artistic directors program so many plays by dead writers. Artistic directors like programming plays by dead writers, dead white males usually. But when you've got a living one, why would you do that? When I was young, I witnessed the playwright being sent out of the room because the director said this, and the playwright said, oh no, I didn't mean that. And the director got so upset, he said, get her out of here. And that if you love the play, you must respect the playwright, is my view. But I think when the playwright's not around, the director can be God. No one can question. This is how it happens. You know, this is what the playwright meant. So you don't have the playwright saying, no, I didn't. I'm worried about this director ego and what we do with it and how we control it and make it more productive. At some point, we wanted to have a moratorium on Shakespeare because everybody was doing Shakespeare and no one was doing the living writers and doing the classics and there were these dead writers. And of course, it's cheaper. You don't have to pay rights. It's cheap. But the playwrights are saying, so I was very supportive of that movement. So what we didn't succeed in banning Shakespeare, but we did succeed in making artistic directors and companies put aside a percentage of the box office. Okay, so every play you do, there's a percentage of the box office that you usually have to pay to rights, royalties, okay? Anywhere between 4% and 10%. And when you're signing checks for overseas writers, you go, I've got to send this money leaving Australia to go to David Hare. He doesn't need it, but we need it. You know, it's leaving the country. And what's coming in? What money's coming from overseas for Indian playwrights? Is there any money coming in? Other companies doing it and paying you money to have the rights to do it. Whereas we're happily doing it the other way, but it's not reciprocal. How to make it reciprocal is terribly important. What we succeeded in doing was get a percentage of the box office put aside. If you do a classic, dead playwright, don't have to pay to anybody. The rights are available, free. That money then went into commissioning of new work. So we succeeded, and it's a good idea. So put aside the money that like little profit that you made by doing a dead writer, and spend that bit on a living writer. Was a nice thing that's developed, and we still do that now. We also managed to get a percentage for the producing house. So if I produce the first play, I run a big risk. I do a new play by Joanna Murray Smith, and it's very risky at the time. Then we get it on in New York, then we get it on in London, and now it's been translated into about 14 languages, and it's a big hit. And we weren't getting any income from that as a producer who has all the risk. So we managed to fight this one. This was very difficult to fight. Even the writing union didn't want it. But we wanted to claim a percentage, it was only 2%, for the originating company. So if you make a new work, not only does the playwright get some money if we do a new production, but the company, for the next 4 years, any new productions, the company also got money from that, which was really useful because every now and then you would have a hit. I would be doing between 8 and 14 plays, new plays per year, and many of them made money. So it's just the risk with new work is so big that you need either a special subsidy for that or a special group of money. Because there's not much risk when you're doing a known play. The risk of the unknown play is the big problem. Because it might fail. It might not work at all. Okay, if one is an artistic director, you know this vast amount of money going out of the country, in Australia and in Singapore. It's all so much overseas work we do. And I do remember this one check to David Hare. And it's particularly painful if that David Hare play wasn't particularly good anyway. And this other play is much better and deserved more. So it's really cultural cringe. It's British, so it must be good. Okay. We have this cultural cringe. And I suspect that most theatre has it. I notice that the Japanese still, want to do Pulitzer Prize in American play as well. So we don't know. It's a sort of a post-colonial syndrome that we all have. The best is from abroad. But remember Kostya in The Seagull. He says we've got to have change, but also he says, these great priests of art, showing us how to wear the clothes and being in the living room in the broad daylight. He parodies this what I call colonial theatre, because that's the theatre I saw when I was a child. The British touring companies would come to Australia and they would show us how to do theatre. And we'd all go, oh. But it would always be from abroad, and it would always be foreign. It was foreign. It wasn't us. And that's sort of still there. I still look at it and say, what is that? That's not us. It's curious, it's interesting curiosity value, but it's not what we want to have as a common theatre. We need that in our festivals, but we don't need it in our daily theatre. I believe we should be going to the theatre at least once a week as our lifestyle. And of course we want to see our own life reflected on there. Okay, the media and ignorant academics still keep that alive. The media still gets damn excited, the Moscow Arts arrive or something. And we all know, this is the other thing working in the theatre, we know that a Broadway show, or Andrew Lloyd Webber, for example, indeed probably all what we call commercial theatre, and commerce generally, we can create a demand if we've got enough marketing budget. Mm-hmm. So if we have a huge poster and put a cat in a spotlight and say, cats, everybody say, ooh, cats, what's that? What's cat? And you create a demand. Have you seen Cats? No, I better see Cats. So you create a demand internationally And we can do that. We know we can do it. We just don't have the budgets, the box office to do it. But isn't that clever? Because we're gulling people. You know about advertising, don't you? You see it on your television. You see a product. You think, well, I'll buy that. And you buy it. You're gulled into thinking. It's this trick. So marketing is something we probably all need to learn about. And I think we're not very good at it in the theatre. We're not very good at marketing the arts. Somehow we never managed to sell it properly. But yet we know that we could make a commercial property if we really want to. Set about it. Look at the ingredients that are going into it and look at then how we sell it and market it to do all that. Okay. We choose not to do all that. So whenever I see government being reluctant to put money into the arts, I see a government that is actually really more responsive to multinationals than to its own nation. So they think, oh no, we're not going to give you budgets to build all that up, but we will let, Les Miserables come in with their huge advertising and all that money go off to another country. That's very strange, and we should look at it. I mean, I got quite shocked when I heard that India was opening up to the multinationals. I thought, what happens to all the small shopkeepers, when suddenly they all start to go to Starbucks? Who wants Starbucks, for God's sake? But the young people do, and they think it's trendy, and we do all that. But in actual fact, the coffee's not that good. But it becomes a thing you do. I'm at Starbucks. But it is only marketing, and it is actually gulling and tricking people, isn't it? But I worry when governments don't put the backing to where it really needs to be done. If you want to bring up national pride, and if you want to celebrate the national product. The distribution of plays is difficult, and I've really run out of time and I haven't got anywhere, really, have I? I won't talk about distribution plays, but big problem. And getting the plays translated. But the Japanese government spends money on translating Japanese plays into an English collection so that English collection can go and overseas to be performed. Now, I said to the Australian government, can't we translate our plays into Japanese? And they wouldn't pay for it, But it's quite an interesting thing as to which plays the government, somebody's got to translate, and the translating issue needs to be part of the mechanism, part of the world of the theatre that we're in. Now, we have the popular theatre here, this commercial thing. In Australia, commercial is a bad word. It's derogatory. Oh, it's commercial. Can't be good. It's lowest common denominator. Now, there's something wrong with that, isn't it? There's something very wrong with that thinking that if it's popular, if the common people like it, it can't be good. Now, that's so snobbish that we should all be smacked for thinking such a thought. But what we have to look at, we say, well, is it cliche? Is it old hat? Have we all seen it? Is it actually essentially boring? So if it's essentially boring, why are people coming to it? Or could we just fix few bits of it and make it artistic? I believe anything that's commercial has got artistry in it somewhere. I don't like Walt Disney at all. It's like the Starbucks version of everything. But that company is very good at popularising something. It makes it popular, it draws it in a way that's attractive, it brings music in, it's very good at turning an ordinary story into something of commercial value. Now, I do believe we have to think more about commerce, or we're all going to go down the gurgler. The government funds are just not there around the world. There's closing, all those big companies where the huge people were there employed for years, all their lives. They're just not there now. They're all closing. And now we can no longer say, I'm an artist, give me money. We've got to get back to commerce. And that's why it's very wise of this festival to say, hey, let's look at what is popular theatre, isn't it? And you look at it and you think, hey, it's actually got very strong traditional elements, It's got ingredients that could be bits of Ibsen, it could be bits of Shakespeare. And you think, hey, it's not that different. And we've got to really study where's the line when the audience want to pay more money for that and not come to what we call the art theatre. And the art theatre is something that is usually we spend more time making it, don't we? We spend more time rehearsing it, thinking about every bit. hopefully, art theatre. And that's what Stanislavski did. He simply, with Seagull, which was a disaster, because they just learnt their lines and did it, and tried to do their normal acting, which was slightly melodramatic in those days, of course, and that bombed. And then Stanislavski said, okay, we'll rehearse it over some weeks, and we'll study it, and we'll make decisions and make it more ensemble. And they again invented a whole new way of approaching a play that was art theatre, Moscow artistic theatre. And this equivalent of what is art theatre and what is commercial theatre has actually somehow grown separate, but we don't need it separate. When a healthy country, there's 80% in a healthy country of commercial, is people making money out of some aspect of theatre, and only 20% of it is actually funded. And funded to be experimental, funded because it wouldn't have good box office, but it's important. So again, we have to question, is it worth funding? Why should it have special funding? There's nothing special about that. But when it really is genuinely trying to do something and needs special funding to do it, then we have to give it. And when it should be funded, and when we say, no, get out there, just make it a bit more, put some more songs in it and make it more popular, get out there and earn it. So for young people, my message really is we've got to think much more about theatre making, which is much less than just interpreting yet another old script. And I didn't really get to my thesis because I've got 2 minutes left, I think. But I do want to talk about this difference between the art and the commerce. What we have is a new generation now of artistic directors that are very focused upon innovation. Important thing is it's got to be different. It takes literally Koster's lines about theatre must change. If we can't have new forms, better to have nothing, We've got to have new forms. So they take that literally, and everybody is doing experimental work. They're particularly doing a lot of what we call postmodern or deconstructed work. And they're all doing it all at the same time. So suddenly, where is standard theatre? There's nobody, because all these the whole generation of artistic directors all suddenly doing the same thing in the different cities. And we don't have the conservatoire, really, handing on the tradition. So you can't see, a traditional production of Three Sisters, no, but you can see a wacko one, with sisters going up and down in a lift and things like that. But you can't see a full, rich, classic setting for it. We don't want museum theatre, and this is the problem. How much of it is, that's just museum theatre, or how much is innovation for innovation's sake, I know we don't want to see Hamlet again unless somebody brings a new thing, okay? But with the first play, we owe a lot to it. When we see it again, obviously we have to do new things too. But what point does it actually need a new name? Because sometimes we just had, we had a production of The Seagull in Sydney, and it was so far removed from the play. They set it in an Australian beach house, and they were wandering around in thongs and lying down to sunbake and things. You think, this is Seagull. And I don't mind at all the adaptation. I love the concept that they did an Australian version of it. But they shouldn't call it The Seagull, because they changed the script too much, So when Tennessee Williams wrote his version of The Seagull, he called it Tagorne's Notebook. Tagorne's Notebook. And it's a pretty accurate version of The Seagull, but he gave it a new title. So my view is he'd give it a new title, but at what point? What point is it a new play? At what point is it still Hedda Gabler, and what point is it really Hedda in Bangalore? Where do you change that title? Really interesting question. But the postmodernism is driving people away. The Sydney Theatre Company has dropped subscriptions from 22,000 down to 17. So they've lost 5,000 subscribers in 1 year. There's too much postmodernism. The critics have been very supportive of postmodernism because it's a bit like Emperor's New Clothes. You can't say, hey, that's crap, You daren't say that, because you might be wrong. Oh, that's postmodern. Ooh, it's not crap. Isn't it? So they don't speak out. But what is speaking out? So you have these rather polite, lukewarm critics. So no longer are the critics guiding the public, telling the public where to spend their money. They're remaining just nice. This is nice, and pulling back. But what is happening is the blog sites. Everybody's writing blog sites, and there's a woman in Sydney that she's become quite famous. She's a school teacher, but she's got a blog site called Shit on Your Play. And she tells her what she thinks. And she's so angry. She is so angry when she sees the three sisters going up and down in an iron lift, Now, a lot of it is because she doesn't understand, and a lot of us are fearful that we don't fully understand postmodernism anyway. But good postmodernism is wonderful, but a lot of thought. What is happening is it's become an excuse for laziness. It's much easier to do arbitrary thing. Oh, let's just do that and do that. Oh, we'll bring a car on there, and let's do that. We'll show a bit of a movie here, and we'll put a song there. It's easy. What is difficult is to read a rich text like a classic, and to bring a new interpretation for your community and still be faithful to all those things that's wonderful about that play. That's really hard, really difficult. It took me 18 months working on Three Sisters, and after I'd done it twice before, I spent another 18 months just trying to do it properly till I actually got it somewhere that I was happy with it. But you can't do 18 months with every production. You just can't, can you? So it's difficult. But what I see in the directors today is that they are using this postmodern in an arrogant way as an excuse for laziness. They daren't sit down there with a translator and check what every word really means in the Russian, as I had to do. And I think the problem is it's dividing people now. So the pursuit of that, 8,000 subscribers lost in CD Company, and others just leaving in droves. So I am worried about loss of audience. Now, young people are just quite happy, aren't they, with their thing? As long as they got their gadget in their hand, they're happy. They can entertain themselves forever. So how do we make ourselves more interesting to them? We've got to emphasise that it's community. We've got to emphasise on the audience role in this work. Remember Shakespeare, Henry V, he says, when I speak of horses, imagine that you see them rearing their proud hooves. Now that is fantastic, isn't it? It's a direction to the audience. When I do this, you imagine that, okay? When I do that, you call out, behind you, behind you, Those rules of our melodrama, they're wonderful. Audience are ready and they want to play the game. What we needed to give them some rules and welcome them back to the theatre. Give them food. Can't separate theatre from food. Food, drink, warmth, entertainment. And what Minuchina does at the Kartushri, she shakes everybody's hand. Oh, thanks for coming, thanks for coming. The actors come out, thanks for coming. And you feel special. It's just a little bit more effort that we can make to engage with our audience. Important. I'll finish there. Thank you very much. I can talk forever, so. Are there things that you would like to talk about? Are there things that interest you? We could cut a couple of questions if you want to. I don't know if you do much postmodern, do you? But you see some here, and I think some of the work here has been really interesting. I thought the diploma pieces, playing with postmodern theatre in a really good way. You can feel that they put more work into it. In selecting the image and thinking about it, there's much more work. So the idea is that try not to cheat and be shallow. Give us value for money. That's the other thing. Audiences must get value for money. And they must be, I often think that people who don't go to the theatre, they once had a boring night, a terrible night, And I said, I'll never go to the theatre in my life. And they don't come back. They just don't come back. They say, no, keep it. I don't want it. And the other one is hook them early. So focus upon theatre for young people, the theatre in education. Hook them early. And we've got to hook them early and got to keep them. And we've got to remember that at a certain age they stay home and have babies and they can't afford to go out. So at a certain age we're going to lose them, but don't worry because they'll come back when their children get older. They will come back. So we get an audience of young people and old people, but we don't naturally get a lot of audiences in the middle-aged group or in the young adult group. It's just naturally not happen. But it's that sort of work of understanding what's happening out there with we know audiences' lives. We just need more research. I wish people would write more doctorates on those sorts of things so we'd have equipped with more of the sort of knowledge of our audience. But value for money is terribly important. Don't ever give them a boring night. Always try to give them something special so they'll come back. Yeah.
Aubrey, can you tell us a little more about when you said you don't want to gull the audience?
Okay. Yes, I see shows, with special effects and mirrors and things, and they're tricked. Now, it is fun. I loved watching the birds go across in the Maya Bazaar because I didn't know how they did it. I presume they were little wind-up things and they were on a wire. But I was thinking, how did they do that? So it's wonderful to think, how do they do that for a bit? It's stimulating and it is fun. And there's a place for that, of course. Particularly for children's theatre, we should give them wonderful, exciting things that they don't know. They want to come back for more. But I meant more from the type of theatre, that's the lighting effects and the smoke and the things, and it goes on like that all night, and it's what Brecht really reacted against too, that we're made to feel too much and not to think enough. So I like to think in the theatre. I think that word entertainment means, entertain conjecture of time. It just means to, think about this. That's another way to think about the word entertainment, which is also a dirty word with a lot of artists. It's entertainment. You're in the entertainment industry. I say, no, I'm not. I'm in the communication business. I'm in the communication business. So I'm in a dialogue with the audience. But I got very interested in, I love the idea of an actor walking on stage with a chair, putting the chair down, sitting in it, and then suddenly doing something. The acting that. So there's no illusion about that, of pre-sitting thing, and then the lights come up and there he is in that illusion. I like to create the illusion on stage, and I like the audience to know it's an illusion. So I'm very sick, and then I stop being sick and I pick up my chair and walk off and they go, he's not acting. Sorry, that was just acting. Doesn't matter how super real that is, but then I think you're inviting the audience to consider the art form. We've got an art form, we're asking you to imagine that this person is really sick in this chair. You saw him walk on very healthy, but now change your mind. So it's asking a little bit more of the audience in a different way. And it's getting rid of painted scenery, because we know that doesn't look real anymore. What do we do? I believe the future of theatre is all going to be lights, lights, lights. Do things with lights. It is wondrous what you can do with lights, and that's magical enough. But I love seeing the eyes. I love to see the entire facial expression. But yes, it was simply thinking, is this fair? I've decided that it wasn't fair, but a lot of my colleagues, particularly those who move into musicals, they love the big, grand theatrical. It's just that my aesthetic is not, if you see my production, you won't see, I will never do Les Miserables, not interested. I'm not interested in storming the barracks and the chorus. I've done musicals and operas and things, but I think I like opera more because it's sort of stylized, but musicals with all those big grand sets and revolves. I think spectacle's a big part of it, always has been. Aristotle says it was an important part, and it was a big, big part of the 19th century. And I was so taken with the Maya Bazaar to see the chariots on stage, because we learn, of course, that how 19th century theatre had horses and things. They actually brought those things on stage. I think they're fun. But bringing a real horse on stage is a problem. Cesare Romeo had a real horse on stage, and then they painted the horse. That was quite challenging for us all to worry about the horse being painted. and thinking, where do they keep the horse? Is this fair? All my circus things went, oh, I don't think it's a good idea. I think the horse should be not, kept backstage all night for this little thing. It's a bit like children in theatre. What do you do with it? It's fine with Maya Bazaar because the whole family's there with the children. That's fine. But, when you've got a nanny, it's different. But then on the other hand, the play called War Horse. Have you heard of War Horse? It's puppets. So the horse is a puppet. So instead of having a real horse, you have a puppet. And you have these 3 puppeteers manipulating this horse so it feels very real. But it doesn't look that real. So for the audience, they have to endow it. And I just adore that. I think it's fabulous. So in a way, there is an illusion, but the audience are filling in that last bit of the jigsaw puzzle. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show you this much, but I'm not really going to cheat you. It's not a real horse. It's actually an illusion, and you're going to fill it in. So it's the role of the imagination into the war horse. And it's classic, isn't it? It's a boy and his pet horse and World War One. And the horse goes to World War One, and the boy wants to go and find his horse. Now, even to think about it breaks your heart, doesn't it? So fantastic ingredients for it. And then they think, and it was made by some puppeteers. They took it to the National and said, a friend of mine in my puppet world, they just said, we want to make this play about a pup that had a horse in a puppet. Luckily, the National Theatre backed it. But you can imagine producers saying, But if you look at the ingredients, they're all wonderful ingredients and a marvellous idea to let's celebrate puppetry. I also think there's a big future in manipulated objects, using objects on stage. I just was so thrilled when the diploma show, when they roll those wheels, those car tyres across the... What is that? But was so thrilling, Suddenly I have traffic, I have Delhi streets, so evocative. And if I think about a work by Robert Lepage, French-Canadian director, who's one of the 3 great directors, I think, in the world at the moment, he did a play called the Dragon Trilogy, and it was all about a piece of land, and he showed these people meeting and falling in love, and then the other couple, and then basically he showed that by bringing on men's shoes on the sand, put men's shoes, and then bring women's shoes on the sand, and then they brought little baby shoes on the sand. So they covered the whole area of the stage with men's shoes and women, little families, and you saw the years go by, and the community's growing, and everybody's having babies, and this growth was so beautiful. Just a musical sequence. They just put shoes on the stage, and then some other actors came on with ice skating, with the blade underneath the shoe, and they came cutting through the sand, slightly Nazi, slightly soldier. So World War breaks out, and they cut through, and you see the families split. And I remember vividly one little child's shoe flying through the air. Ay, ay, ay. It was so painful. And that's just me imagining it. But that metaphor is so exciting to think through to the next thing. How do we show it, How do we show years passing, people having babies, First thought is that. So why have we got to find time to get to the next thought, and then develop it further? So it's all time, it's patience, and it's dedication to what about this, what about that, and keep trying new ideas in the theatre making, because when you find an idea like that, you just think, I remember looking at it and thinking, if I had that one idea in my life, I would be happy, just one wonderful thing. He's done many, of course. But I don't know if that is it. But part of it is to do with, we can see what it is. There's no illusion. They're just shoes. But you have to make it into family. So that's what I mean by being less illusion, but in a funny way, more illusion. The illusion's in your head. And I suppose it is when you're gulled in magic as well, isn't it? It's still in your head. My dad doing ventriloquism. But and you think it's coming from the doll because the doll's got the lips moving that way. You think it's that. Still watch what you think it is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I wish you well in your theatre making. Yeah. And I hope you look very closely at the popular theatre. And I hope you think about your audience. And I hope you just go to the next draft before you take it in front of the audience. So when you have something to take the audience, it's more special, it's more heartfelt, and it's earned. You've valued it a little bit more. So my message really is, our art form is immensely valuable. I love it. I've given my life to it. And when I see young people also love it, I get so happy. You know? Playwrights can also act as dramaturgs. I spend all my spare time being a dramaturg, which is just helping the product, asking the right questions. Basically, a good dramaturg keeps asking you questions. You know, why this? Have you thought about that? So they keep you alert and focused on what you're trying to do. And I think we can use the writers. We still need something to say, you know. I think we kid ourselves when we're saying, the actors can make something up. You know, they can never make something up as well as a writer who can really use words. Because how to be condensed and economical with words and evocative with words, is a particular skill that we need to respect. So partly we don't seem to need them anymore because directors have taken over. And directors think, we can do that. Directors say, we'll fix that in rehearsal. Don't worry, we'll fix that in rehearsal. They're going to take a first draft. You cannot fix structural problems in rehearsal. You can't. You can fix jokes, you can fix little bits of text, but the structure has got to be worked before you rehearse. You can't. So there are certain things. One, yes, they're not so in demand. Two, they're working in television, and they're not happy. They're getting paid, but they're not making anything wonderful, so they're not happy in television, but they're getting money. Okay? So three, that the companies are not commissioning them, you know, and celebrating them, and you know, putting their name up in lights. You know, that's important. Companies are not doing that either. But the other one is that playwrights are not themselves looking at new form enough, playing with structure. Most of them don't understand the second act. You know, the second act is just a continuation of the first act. It's not. In the second act, many new things have to happen because the first act is essentially all exposition. We, as audience, we're quite patient. We'll sit there and wait and wait and wait and wait, and we'll work it out. But when the payoff comes, it's got to be good. You don't want to go, is that all it was? You know? Because you're hoping this thing is going to be extraordinary, and it has to be. I think the writers don't do it. So partly they're not going to the ninth draft. That's one of the problems. The ninth draft is usually good. The fourth draft is where it forms its shape, and then the rest is polishing. But without the polish, it's not so good. So you're getting rough scripts that nobody going, is that what new Indian writing is? Well, if that's what it is, I don't want it. They say that about Australia. It's not ready, they say. It's not ready. Shouldn't have done it. So it gets a bad name. So we've got to help the new writing get a good name. We've got to, if the writers, we can't afford to commission them, get them in to watch a run through. And, you know, could you give us a bit of text for this bit? Even give us a little speech here. Make them feel loved and wanted. Don't alienate them from us. We've got to keep them connected. But I think it'll come back. It's just a period. I mean, we will go through this postmodern deconstructing and arbitrarily putting anything in any order. It doesn't really matter. And meaning, what's it mean? What did you think it meant? I thought it was about World War II. Yeah, that's right. That's okay. And really, they weren't thinking that at all. They're allowing it to be whatever you want it to be. That's a bit lazy, isn't it? Isn't that a bit lazy? So you should have something you want to say, and you should care that you got it. And if you didn't get it, if you paid your money for my play and you didn't understand it, then something went wrong. And what do we do about that? But I think as long as we keep cherishing them, and if we can keep them practicing, writers, no good just doing it in their head. Writers have actually got to write it out, and writers of plays have to hear it said. Novelists don't. Novelists don't need us. But playwrights need to hear it. So if you've got playwriting friends, say, can we read your play? And get your group around and read it for them. It's a gift. They'll be so grateful that you read their play for them and have a little bit of a dialogue. And they'll hear their play in a different way and they'll do more work because you've showed interest in it. I think actors in the spare time should always be volunteering their time to writers to help them do the writing. So that's the spare time thing. We have call centre. A lot of actors in Australia are out of work, so they're all on call centres, you know. Do you have that here? Yeah. So they're in there doing on a telephone. And I'm saying, if only we had another room where all the actors were, and then somebody brought their play in, and all the actors, hey, there's a new play. They all drop the call centre and run here and do this, so that they could all help. Because usually a playwright has just finished a new draft. He's very excited. He's got a new draft. He brings it to a theatre company or posts it, you know. It's 3 months, at least 3 months before they get a letter. Oh, thank you, we've received your play. You'll hear from us in due course. And then when they finally get a little letter saying, we were worried about the bit on Act 3, the writer says, I don't care about Act 3, you know. They've lost it. They've lost that impulse. They don't really care. They're not interested in the detailed stuff. They're only interested in whether you want to do it. Do you want to do it or not do it, you know? They get impatient with us. And I think we don't want that situation where we either do it or we don't do it. We want, oh, we'll help you develop it. And then somebody loves it. There will be somebody loves it. And the important one is the playwright has to find the director who loves his play. And not every director will love that play, but some director will. And how they find each other, I don't know, because we have no meeting places. So places like this are meeting places. You know, that's why I had to do it playwright. I had to make rooms whereby actors would be normally sitting around having coffee, and directors would come in, and playwrights would come in. This hub, which we have here, where people can meet and can tell each other and can make sure, and the next time you see them, you can tell them again, I'm that person who loved your play. I still want to read the next draft, you know. Hands up. It is self-promotion, but it's actually following your heart. If you really like that writer, then pursue that writer. They'll be flattered. They'll love it. I think we do need to treasure our writers a little bit more. They're a bit hurt and lost and thrown out. You know, why do we throw writers out of theatre? You know, Shakespeare, you know, Ibsen, Chekhov, they were in the theatres. Then we sort of pushed them out. Go out on the campus, write your play out there. Don't come here. Something wrong in that. They're part of our family. So welcome them. Yeah. It's a long, funny answer, but I'm optimistic that things will get better. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go and get on with your lives. Thanks so much for your interest.